I was staring at a birthday cake smashed across my son's patio when my daughter-in-law shrugged and said one word. Oops. The frosting was smeared across the concrete. Pink roses made of icing were crushed beneath someone's shoe. My youngest granddaughter started crying. The guests stood frozen, and my daughter-in-law Emily looked almost pleased with herself. Everyone expected me to explode. They expected tears, or yelling, or at least one sharp comment. Instead, I smiled. Just smiled. And by the end of that evening, Emily would begin discovering something she had forgotten years ago. The people you take for granted don't always stay exactly where you left them. My name is Carol Henderson. I'm 68 years old. I'm a widow. And until that birthday party, I had spent most of my life making everyone else's life easier. The funny thing is, I never planned to become the family problem solver. It just happened gradually. First, it was helping my son Michael with rent when he was starting his career. Then it was babysitting when the grandchildren came along. Then it was picking children up from school, driving people to appointments, helping during illnesses, watching the house during vacations, cooking holiday meals and handling every small family emergency nobody else wanted to deal with. I didn't resent it, at least not at first. I loved my family, especially after my husband Frank passed away 8 years earlier. Helping them gave me purpose. It made me feel useful, needed, connected. But somewhere along the way, appreciation quietly turned into expectation, and expectation slowly became entitlement. The first signs were small, easy to ignore. Emily would forget to say thank you. Michael would assume I was available before asking. Plans would be made around my schedule without anyone actually checking my schedule. None of it seemed serious enough to mention, so I stayed silent. I convinced myself I was being sensitive, that families go through phases, that everybody gets busy. Then the little moments started piling up. One Christmas, Emily complained about a gift I bought her. Not directly. She was too smart for that. Instead, she smiled and said, "It's nice. I probably wouldn't have picked this color, but it's nice." Another time, she invited everyone in the family to dinner except me. When Michael realized the mistake and asked about it, she laughed. "Oh, I thought your mom already had plans." I hadn't. But I let it go. Again, and again, and again. The strange thing about disrespect is that it rarely arrives all at once. It sneaks in quietly, one small moment at a time, until one day you realize someone has become comfortable treating you poorly. This birthday was supposed to be different. It was my 68th birthday. Nothing major. Just a backyard gathering at Michael and Emily's house. A few relatives, some neighbors, my 3 grandchildren, a barbecue, a cake. Simple. Exactly how I liked things. The afternoon started pleasantly enough. The weather was perfect. The children were running around the yard. People were laughing. For a while, I allowed myself to believe maybe things had improved. Maybe I had imagined some of the tension. Then the cake arrived. It was beautiful. Nothing extravagant. Just a vanilla cake from a local bakery. My favorite. Pink flowers around the edges. "Happy birthday, Mom," written across the top. The grandchildren carried it out proudly. My oldest granddaughter, Sophie, had helped pick it out. She was 10 years old and incredibly excited. "Grandma, don't look yet," she shouted. I pretended to cover my eyes. Everyone laughed. Then they placed the cake on a patio table. People gathered around. Phones came out. Someone started singing. I remember looking at Sophie. She was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Then I saw Emily moving toward the table. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She was carrying a tray, talking to someone over her shoulder. Then her elbow hit the cake stand. Not hard. Not enough to look dramatic, just enough. The stand tilted. The cake slid. For 1 second, everyone watched it happen. Then gravity finished the job. The cake crashed onto the patio. Silence, absolute silence. The kind that feels loud. Frosting splattered across the concrete. Sophie's smile disappeared instantly. The little one stared in shock, and Emily looked down at the mess. Then she said it. Oops. Not embarrassed. Not apologetic. Not surprised. Just, oops. I looked directly at her. For a brief second our eyes met, and in that moment I knew. She hadn't slipped. She hadn't lost her balance. She hadn't been distracted. She simply didn't care. Maybe she didn't mean to destroy the cake, but she absolutely didn't care that she had. And somehow that felt worse. I could hear people holding their breath, waiting, watching. Emily seemed to be waiting too, almost daring me to react. Then something unexpected happened. Not to her, to me. For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. No anger, no embarrassment, no desire to defend myself. Just clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when you finally had enough. I smiled. A small smile. Nothing dramatic. Then I said, well, accidents happen. The look on Emily's face changed immediately. Only slightly, but enough. Because she wasn't expecting kindness. She wasn't expecting calm. She wasn't expecting nothing. Michael looked relieved. Guests relaxed. Conversation slowly resumed. People helped clean up. Another dessert was brought out. The party continued. But something fundamental had shifted. Not outside, inside me. As I sat quietly watching my grandchildren play, I realized I was tired. Not physically, emotionally. Tired of being available every minute. Tired of being taken for granted. Tired of pretending not to notice things. For years I had believed keeping peace meant accepting whatever people gave me. That afternoon I finally understood something different. Peace and self-respect are not the same thing. And sometimes protecting one requires defending the other. As the sun began setting, Emily laughed with guests as though nothing unusual had happened. Michael grilled burgers. The children chased fireflies. Everything looked normal. But I had already made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to punish anyone. I wasn't going to seek revenge in the way people usually imagine revenge. I was simply going to stop carrying responsibilities that no longer belonged to me. And I had a feeling that when that happened, certain people were going to notice very quickly. The smashed cake wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. The morning after my birthday, my phone rang at 6:42 a.m. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I saw Emily's name on the screen. I let it ring. Not because I was angry. Because I didn't feel obligated to answer immediately anymore. That was a new feeling. A strange feeling. For years, I had treated every family phone call like an emergency. If Michael called, I answered. If Emily texted, I responded. If one of the grandchildren needed something, I rearranged my schedule. I had become the family safety net. The person everyone assumed would always be available. That morning, I simply finished pouring my coffee first. Then I called back. Emily answered immediately. Hi, Carol. Not Mom. Not Carol with warmth. Just Carol. Good morning, I said. I was wondering if you could watch the kids this afternoon. Of course. Less than 24 hours after my birthday. Less than 24 hours after the cake incident. Straight back to business. I glanced out the window. Sunlight was beginning to fill my backyard. The birds were already at the feeder Frank had built years ago. For the first time in a long time, I asked myself a question before answering. Do I actually want to do this? The answer surprised me. No, I said gently. Silence. No. I already have plans. The truth was that my plans involved absolutely nothing important. A trip to the bookstore. Maybe lunch with a friend. A quiet afternoon. But they were still plans. My plans. For years, I had treated my own life as something flexible and optional. Everyone else's needs came first. Emily sounded confused. Okay. Then she added, what kind of plans? I nearly laughed. Not because she was rude, because I suddenly realized how normal that question had become. People don't usually demand details when someone says they're unavailable. But my family had grown accustomed to auditing my schedule, as though my time belonged to them. Just some things I need to do, I replied. Another pause. Well, okay. She sounded disappointed, almost irritated. We ended the call. 10 minutes later, Michael called. I wasn't surprised. Mom, morning, sweetheart. Emily said you can't watch the kids today. I can't. Everything okay? I smiled sadly. Michael wasn't trying to manipulate me. He genuinely didn't understand. Because for years I had trained him not to. Whenever he needed help, I found a way. Whenever things became difficult, I stepped in. Eventually, people stopped seeing sacrifices. They only see reliability. Everything's fine, I said. I just have other plans. Oh. He sounded puzzled. Not angry, just confused. As if gravity had briefly stopped working. We talked for a few minutes, then he hung up. The rest of the day passed peacefully. I visited a small bookstore downtown, bought 2 novels, had lunch with my friend Linda, walked through a nearby park. Nothing extraordinary. Yet I couldn't remember the last time I had spent an entire afternoon doing exactly what I wanted. Without guilt, without apologies, without checking my phone every 10 minutes. That evening, Linda asked a question that stayed with me. When was the last time you put yourself first? I couldn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. A few days later, another opportunity arrived. Michael called again. Mom, any chance you can pick up the kids from school tomorrow? Normally, I would have said yes before he finished asking. Instead, I checked my calendar. A habit I should have developed years earlier. I can't tomorrow. Busy. Yes. Another silence. Not hostile. Just unfamiliar. Like we were both learning new rules. After we hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about Frank. My husband had always noticed things before I did. Especially family dynamics. I remembered a conversation from years ago. One evening after watching me exhaust myself helping everyone, he had said, "Carol, one day they're going to assume you do all this because it's your job." I had laughed. They'd never do that. Frank had smiled. Not intentionally. Then he kissed my forehead. But habits have a way of becoming expectations. At the time, I thought he was wrong. Now I realized he had been exactly right. The following weekend brought another test. My grandson Tyler had a soccer game. I attended as always. The children had done nothing wrong. My issues weren't with them. After the game, several parents gathered near the parking lot. One of the mothers approached me. "Your daughter-in-law seems stressed lately." I nearly defended Emily automatically. Old habits. Then I stopped. Because I wasn't responsible for managing Emily's reputation either. "Parenting can be stressful," I said. Which was true. That evening, Michael called again. This time he sounded tired. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you upset about the birthday cake?" There it was. The question everyone had been avoiding. I considered my answer carefully. "Not about the cake." "Then what?" "Michael, have you ever noticed that most people only call me when they need something?" The silence that followed felt different. Longer. More thoughtful. "I don't know." "I think you do." He didn't argue. Because deep down he knew. "I guess maybe we have depended on you a lot." "A lot isn't the problem." "What is—" I stared at the framed photograph sitting beside my chair. Frank holding our newborn son decades earlier. Back when everything seemed simple. "The problem is that somewhere along the way, appreciation disappeared." Michael exhaled slowly. "I didn't realize that." "I know." And I believed him. That was the tragedy. Most entitlement isn't malicious. It's gradual. People get used to receiving. They stop noticing the cost. Over the next few weeks, little things began happening. Emily had to leave work early because childcare fell through. Michael missed a golf outing because he needed to stay home with a sick child. Weekend plans became harder to coordinate. Nobody was suffering. Nobody was in crisis. They were simply handling responsibilities that I had quietly absorbed for years. One afternoon, my sister Janet called. Apparently, word of the birthday incident had spread through the family. "Tell me what really happened." I told her. Every detail. Especially the part where Emily said, "Oops." Janet was quiet for a moment. Then she said something interesting. "Carol, this wasn't really about the cake. Number. It never is." She was right. The cake was merely the final straw. The visible symptom of something much larger. Months of accumulated disrespect. Years of unbalanced expectations. And perhaps my own unwillingness to set boundaries. One evening I received a text from Emily. A rare occurrence. It simply said, "Can you watch the kids Saturday?" No greeting. No please. No explanation. I stared at the screen. Then typed back, "Sorry, I'm unavailable." A few minutes later, "For what?" I smiled. There was that question again. As though my time required approval. As though retirement meant permanent availability. This time I didn't answer. The next day Michael called. "Emily's frustrated." "I know." "She's saying you're punishing her." That hurt more than I expected. Because it revealed how little she understood. This isn't punishment. What is it? It's retirement. Retirement. From being everyone's backup plan. Michael laughed unexpectedly. A tired laugh. But a genuine one. For the first time I sensed something shifting. Not in Emily. In him. Maybe he was finally beginning to see the pattern. Maybe he was finally noticing everything I had quietly carried. And if he was noticing sooner or later, others would too. A week later I learned something interesting. People notice boundaries much faster than they notice generosity. For years I had spent countless hours helping my family. Nobody talked about it. Nobody gathered around a dinner table and said, "Can you believe everything Mom does for us?" Why would they? It had become normal. Expected. Invisible. But the moment I started saying no, everybody noticed. The first person to notice wasn't Emily. It was my oldest granddaughter, Sophie. One Wednesday afternoon, she called me from her mother's phone. "Grandma." Her voice immediately softened my heart. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you mad at Mom?" Children always go straight to the real question. I smiled. "No, honey." "Then why haven't you been coming over as much?" I chose my words carefully. Because children deserve honesty, but they also deserve peace. Sometimes grown-ups need to make small changes. "Oh." She sounded thoughtful. "Then, can I still come visit you?" My chest tightened. Of course. That Saturday, Sophie spent the afternoon at my house. Just Sophie. No babysitting. No obligations. No errands. Just time together. We baked cookies. Worked on a puzzle. Talked about school. At one point, she looked up from the kitchen table and said, "I like when it's just us." That simple sentence reminded me of something important. Relationships are strongest when they're chosen. Not assigned. Not expected. Chosen. For years, so much of my time with the grandchildren had happened because I was helping their parents. Now I was starting to enjoy spending time with them simply because we wanted to be together. And that felt different. Better somehow. Meanwhile, things at Michael and Emily's house were becoming more complicated. Not disastrous. Just real. One afternoon, Michael stopped by unexpectedly. He looked tired. Not angry. Just exhausted. I invited him inside. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee. For several minutes, neither of us mentioned the obvious. Finally, he sighed. "We've been spending a fortune on childcare." I nodded. Not because I felt victorious. Because I already knew. Professional childcare is expensive. Always has been. For years, I had quietly absorbed those costs through my time. Free labor has value. People simply forget that when it comes from family. Michael rubbed his forehead. "I never realized how much you were doing." There it was. The sentence. Not an apology, but a realization. Sometimes that's where change begins. "I wasn't keeping score," I said. "I know. And I don't regret helping." "I know that too." He looked around my kitchen. His eyes landed on a photograph of Frank. Then he smiled sadly. "Dad would have had something to say about all this." I laughed. "Probably. Actually, I knew exactly what Frank would have said. Set boundaries sooner." 2 weeks later, things escalated unexpectedly. Not because of me. Because of a family barbecue. My sister Janet hosted it. Nothing fancy. Just hamburgers, hot dogs, and too many folding chairs in the backyard. Most of the family attended, including Emily. The atmosphere started pleasantly enough. People talked. Kids played. The usual family gathering. Then my cousin Ruth made a mistake. Or perhaps it wasn't a mistake. Perhaps she was simply tired of staying quiet. The conversation had turned toward grandparents helping with childcare. Someone mentioned rising daycare costs. Ruth nodded toward me. Carol probably saved Michael and Emily thousands over the years. The table went quiet. Not awkward. Just attentive. Emily forced a smile. "She's been very helpful." Helpful. The word bothered me more than I expected. Not because it was wrong. Because it felt small. Like describing a bridge as useful. Technically accurate. Emotionally incomplete. Then Janet spoke. And everything changed. "Helpful," she laughed. "Carol practically raised those kids while you two were working." Emily's smile disappeared. A few people exchanged glances. Nobody disagreed. Janet continued. "Remember when Tyler broke his arm?" Heads nodded. "Who spent 3 days helping?" Silence. "Carol?" She looked around the table. "Remember when Sophie had pneumonia?" More silence. "Carol." Then, "Remember when Michael lost his job?" I already knew where this was going. Unfortunately, so did Emily. "Janet," I warned gently. But my sister wasn't interested in stopping. Not after years of watching. Carol covered groceries for months. Several relatives nodded. Apparently, everyone remembered. Everyone except the people who benefited most. The conversation shifted after that. Stories began appearing from every direction. Small stories. Ordinary stories. But together they painted a picture. My niece remembered me helping her after surgery. A neighbor remembered me driving her husband to chemotherapy appointments. A cousin remembered borrowing money years earlier. None of these stories felt remarkable to me. I had simply done what seemed right. Yet hearing them all together felt strange. Almost uncomfortable. Because I wasn't used to being seen. Across the table, Emily grew quieter. Not angry. Uneasy. As if she were hearing about a different version of me than the one she carried in her mind. Eventually, Michael spoke. "Mom never told me about half of this." That sentence hung in the air. Because it was true. I never had. I didn't believe kindness should come with invoices. But perhaps that silence had created its own problems. If people never hear the sacrifices, they eventually assume there aren't any. Later that evening, after most guests had gone home, Michael approached me privately. The sun was setting. Children were chasing lightning bugs across the yard. For a moment, he looked exactly like the little boy I used to tuck into bed. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated. Then, "Why didn't you ever tell me things were this bad with Emily?" There it was. The question I knew would eventually come. I thought carefully before answering. Because I kept hoping it would get better. His expression fell. And it didn't. I looked away briefly, then back at him. No. The honesty hurt. For both of us. Michael sat quietly, thinking, processing. Finally he nodded. Not defensively, not angrily, just sadly. For the first time I think he understood something. Not that Emily was a terrible person. She wasn't. Not that I was perfect. I wasn't. But patterns matter. And once someone finally sees a pattern, it's very difficult to unsee it. As I drove home that night, I had a feeling something important had shifted. Not in me. That shift had already happened. In Michael. And when a son finally starts seeing his mother clearly again, family dynamics rarely stay the same. 3 days after the barbecue, Michael showed up at my house without calling first. That alone told me something was wrong. My son had always been considerate about dropping by. Frank and I raised him that way. So when I opened the door and found him standing there looking exhausted, I immediately stepped aside. Come in. He walked inside slowly. Not angry. Not upset. Just worn down. The kind of tired that comes from thinking too much. I put on a pot of coffee while he sat at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. Mom, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. He stared into his coffee. Has Emily always treated you this way? The question didn't surprise me. The timing did. I sat across from him. What do you mean? You know what I mean? Yes, I did. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then I answered. Not always. That was important. Because I wasn't interested in rewriting history. Emily hadn't entered our family as a villain. She had once been warm, grateful, thoughtful. I remembered helping her choose wedding decorations. I remembered her crying when Sophie was born. I remembered family vacations and holiday dinners. There had been good years. Real ones. Michael listened quietly. She changed. I considered that carefully. Then I shook my head. Not exactly. What do you mean? People rarely change overnight. I took a sip of coffee. I think little habits grow. He frowned. Habits. Being inconsiderate, being dismissive, taking people for granted. I shrugged. If nobody addresses those things, they get bigger. Michael looked away. And I knew exactly what he was thinking. He wasn't just evaluating Emily. He was evaluating himself. Because every unhealthy family pattern requires more than one participant. Somebody creates it. Somebody allows it. Sometimes both. That evening after Michael left, I received a text from Emily. The first real message she'd sent in weeks. It simply said, "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen. For a moment, I considered saying no. Not out of spite, out of caution. Because difficult conversations require honesty. And honesty is uncomfortable. Especially for people who have avoided it. Still, I replied, "Sure." The next afternoon, she came over. Alone. No children. No Michael. Just Emily. That immediately caught my attention. Because for the first time since joining our family, she looked uncertain. Not defensive. Not annoyed. Uncertain. I invited her inside. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Michael had sat the day before. Funny how life works. For several minutes, she studied her coffee cup. Then she finally spoke. Everyone thinks I'm the bad guy now. There it was. The opening statement. I wasn't surprised. People often begin difficult conversations by talking about how they're being perceived. Not about what happened. About how they're being perceived. I answered carefully. I don't think anyone believes you're a bad person. She looked up. Really? Yes. The relief on her face lasted less than a second. Because she knew there was more. But, I nodded. But I think people are starting to notice things. Silence. Emily stared at the table. You mean the cake. Not just the cake. The moment those words left my mouth, I saw something shift. A realization. Because deep down she already knew. The cake wasn't the problem. The cake was simply the moment nobody could ignore anymore. I didn't mean to knock it over, she said. The statement sounded rehearsed. Maybe she'd repeated it to herself 100 times. Maybe she needed to believe it. I wasn't interested in arguing. Okay, she blinked. You don't believe me. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Then I answered honestly. I believe you didn't care enough to be careful. That landed harder than an accusation. Because it was true. And truth rarely needs volume. Emily stared at me, then looked away. For the first time, she didn't immediately defend herself. Interesting. Very interesting. After a while, she said quietly, You think I'm selfish? I considered that, then shook my head. Number. Her eyes narrowed slightly. No, I think you've become accustomed to people adjusting around you. The room went silent, because we both knew exactly what I meant. For years, people had adjusted. Michael adjusted. The children adjusted. I adjusted. Everyone adjusted. And eventually, Emily stopped noticing it was happening. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Sometimes calm, sometimes uncomfortable, never hostile. Several times I saw tears gathering in her eyes. Several times I nearly felt sorry for her. Then I reminded myself of something important. Feeling sorry for someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences. The two are not the same. Toward the end of the conversation, Emily asked something unexpected. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the answer was painfully simple. I did. She looked confused. "No, you didn't." "Yes, I did." I smiled sadly. "You just weren't listening." The look on her face told me she was searching her memory and finding things. Small moments, little conversations, gentle requests, minor complaints. Times when I had tried to address issues without creating conflict. Times she had dismissed them, or forgotten them, or explained them away. Eventually, she lowered her eyes. "Oh, exactly. Oh." A few days later, the consequences continued arriving. Not dramatic consequences, practical ones. Michael started saying no more often. The children began spending more time helping around the house. Schedules became more balanced. Responsibilities became more evenly distributed. At first, Emily hated it. Then she became frustrated. Then she became exhausted. And finally, she became aware. Awareness is often the first step toward change. Not guilt. Not shame. Awareness. One Saturday afternoon, I received a call from Sophie. "Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart. You coming to my piano recital?" I smiled immediately. "Wouldn't miss it." "Promise." "I promise." When I arrived at the recital a week later, I noticed something. Emily was different. Subtle, but different. She thanked me for coming. Actually thanked me. Not automatically. Not casually. Sincerely. The old version of me would have celebrated that tiny improvement. The new version simply noticed it. Growth matters, but trust takes longer. That evening after the recital, Michael walked me to my car. The parking lot was nearly empty. Families were heading home. Children carried flowers and recital programs. Michael leaned against my car and smiled. "You know something?" "What?" "Things are changing." I nodded. "I know." He laughed softly. "No, I mean really changing." For a moment we stood there quietly. Then he added, "Emily's starting to see it." I looked at him. "See what?" The answer came immediately. All the things she stopped seeing. As I drove home that night, I thought about the smashed birthday cake. Funny. Weeks earlier, it had felt like the biggest moment of the year. Now it seemed much smaller. Because the cake was never the story. The story was respect. And once people begin recognizing what they've lost, they're often willing to work very hard to earn it back. The real turning point didn't happen during an argument. It didn't happen during a dramatic family meeting. And it certainly didn't happen because I delivered some clever speech that changed everyone's mind. Life rarely works that way. The real turning point happened on a rainy Tuesday evening when my granddaughter Sophie called me crying. At first, I couldn't understand what she was saying. Between the tears and sniffles, all I caught was, "Grandma, Mom and Dad are fighting." My heart sank. Not because married couples argue. Every marriage has disagreements. Frank and I certainly did. What worried me was hearing that fear in her voice. Children always know more than adults think they do. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "where are your parents right now?" "Kitchen." "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Okay, take a deep breath." I spent the next 10 minutes calming her down. Eventually, Michael got on the phone. He sounded embarrassed. And tired. Very tired. "Sorry, Mom." "It's okay." "No, it's not." His voice lowered. "The kids shouldn't hear this stuff." He was right. They shouldn't. But unfortunately, family problems don't stay neatly contained. Eventually, they leak into everything. The next morning, Michael came by. Again. That had become a pattern lately. For years, he rarely stopped by unless he needed something. Now he came simply to talk. That alone told me how much was changing. We sat on my porch drinking coffee. The sky was gray. Spring rain still lingered in the air. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Michael sighed. "I think Emily finally understands." I looked at him. "Understands what?" "What it actually takes to keep a family running." I nodded slowly. That made sense. For years, Emily had focused on visible contributions. The job, the income, the schedule, the big things. But family life is often held together by invisible work. The rides, the meals, the phone calls, the planning, the emotional labor, the hundreds of small acts nobody notices until they disappear. Michael stared across the yard. We've been doing everything ourselves for the last few months. That's called adulthood. He laughed. Yeah. Then he became serious again. I don't think we appreciated you. There it was. The sentence I'd waited years to hear. Not because I wanted praise, because I wanted understanding. Those are different things. I know. His eyes widened slightly. You know, Michael, I figured it out long before you did. That earned a reluctant smile. A week later, I attended Sophie's soccer tournament. The entire family was there. Parents, grandparents, siblings, coolers full of snacks, foldable chairs, the usual suburban American weekend. I arrived early and found a seat near the field. A few minutes later, Emily walked over. Alone. Again. Interesting. That seemed to be happening more often. She sat beside me. For several moments, we watched the children warming up. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. Finally, she spoke. Sophie talks about you constantly. I smiled. She's a wonderful kid. She is. More silence. Then, she misses seeing you every week. The comment wasn't manipulative. At least it didn't sound that way. It sounded sad. Honest. I appreciated that. I miss her too. Emily nodded. Then she surprised me. I thought you were punishing me. I looked at her. You did? Yes. At least she was honest. That was progress. What changed your mind? She laughed quietly. A humorless little laugh. Reality. I couldn't help smiling. Reality has a way of correcting misunderstandings, especially expensive misunderstandings. For the first time, Emily began talking openly. Really openly. Not defending herself. Not explaining. Just talking. She admitted how overwhelmed she felt. How exhausted. How frustrated. How difficult balancing work and family had become. I listened. Because those struggles were real. They deserved acknowledgement. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. I think I was jealous. I blinked. Jealous? She nodded. Of your relationship with the kids. That wasn't what I expected. At all. She stared at the soccer field while she spoke. As stupid as it sounds? Her voice trailed off. Then continued. They adore you. I waited. And sometimes I felt like I couldn't compete. The honesty surprised me. Because jealousy often hides behind other emotions. Criticism, dismissiveness, control. Sometimes what looks like arrogance is actually insecurity wearing a disguise. That realization didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped explain it. And understanding matters. A month later, another family gathering arrived. This time it was my sister Janet's anniversary party. I wasn't sure what to expect. Family events had become unpredictable lately. To my surprise, everything went smoothly. No tension. No awkward comments. No passive-aggressive remarks. At one point, I caught Janet watching Emily, then watching me. She walked over and whispered, "She's different." I followed her gaze. Emily was helping clear tables, talking with relatives, playing with the children. Nothing remarkable. Yet something had changed. The constant edge was gone. The defensiveness. The entitlement. The assumption that everyone else would adjust. Janet smiled. Maybe people can change. Sometimes. The older I get, the more I believe that. Not everyone changes, but some do. Especially when life finally gives them a reason. A few days after the anniversary party, my phone rang. Emily? When I answered, her voice sounded nervous. Can we meet? I immediately knew this wasn't about babysitting, or schedules, or favors. Something was different. Sure, we arranged to meet at a small coffee shop downtown. The following afternoon, I arrived a few minutes early. When Emily walked in, I noticed something unusual. She looked terrified. Not angry, not defensive. Terrified. As though she had rehearsed this conversation 100 times and suddenly forgotten every line. We ordered coffee, sat down, and for several seconds she simply stared at the table. Then she looked up. There were tears in her eyes, real tears, not dramatic ones. The kind people spend weeks trying not to cry. Carol, her voice cracked. And in that moment I knew. The conversation I'd been waiting for was finally about to happen. The coffee shop was quiet. Mid-afternoon. The lunch crowd had already left and the evening customers hadn't arrived yet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. A few people worked on laptops in the corner. A retired couple shared a slice of pie near the entrance. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Meanwhile, across from me, my daughter-in-law looked as though she was about to walk into a courtroom. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Emily kept twisting a paper napkin between her fingers. Finally, she took a deep breath. Then another. And another. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the birthday cake. The months of disrespect. The years of assumptions. Compassion is important. But so is memory. Carol! Her voice trembled slightly. I owe you an apology. There it was. Simple. Direct. No excuses attached. No explanation first. Just an apology. That alone surprised me. Most people spend 10 minutes justifying themselves before they apologize. Emily didn't. She simply sat there looking frightened and sincere. I've practiced this conversation so many times. I smiled faintly. I can tell. A nervous laugh escaped her. Then tears filled her eyes. I handled everything wrong. For a moment I said nothing. Not because I was angry. Because I wanted her to continue. Sometimes silence is the most powerful thing you can offer another person. Eventually she did. I kept telling myself I was stressed. She wiped her eyes. And sometimes I was. I nodded. Parenting is stressful. Marriage is stressful. Life is stressful. Those things were true. But stress doesn't make someone act the way I acted. It doesn't. She stared down at her coffee. I always had a reason. A pause. A bad day. Another pause. Work problems. Another. The kids. Then she shook her head. But after a while, those stopped being reasons and started becoming excuses. I could see how difficult it was for her to say that. Most people spend their entire lives protecting their self-image. Few willingly examine it. Even fewer admit what they find. I'm listening, I said quietly. Emily nodded. Then she delivered the sentence that explained everything. Or at least most of it. I was jealous. There it was again. The same word she'd used at the soccer game. Only this time she didn't stop there. I hated how much the kids loved being with you. I remained silent. Not because I disagreed. Because I wanted to understand. They always wanted Grandma. Her eyes filled again. They called you first. I could hear the shame in her voice. They ran to you. A small laugh escaped her. A sad one. And somehow I convinced myself that meant I was failing. The statement hung between us. And suddenly everything made more sense. Not the behavior. The motivation. Those are different things. For years I had assumed Emily's actions came from arrogance. Perhaps some of them did. But insecurity had been living underneath it. Quietly shaping everything. The cake wasn't an accident. The words arrived so softly I almost missed them. I stared at her. She lowered her eyes. No. The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet. Outside, rain continued falling. Inside, neither of us moved. I didn't plan it. She spoke quickly. I'm not saying that. I waited. But I was angry. Another pause. And when I bumped the table, her voice cracked. I didn't care. There it was. The truth. Almost exactly what I had suspected from the beginning. Not premeditated. Not intentional. But careless. Disrespectful. Cruel. Because in that moment my feelings simply hadn't mattered enough. Emily wiped her eyes again. When Sophie started crying, I knew immediately how awful I'd been. I believed her. Because genuine regret sounds different. It's quieter. Less dramatic. More painful. For a long time neither of us spoke. Then she looked directly at me. Something she rarely did when conversations became uncomfortable. I'm sorry. 3 words. Simple. Honest. Heavy. Not. I'm sorry if you were hurt. Not. I'm sorry you misunderstood. Not. I'm sorry, but just, I'm sorry. The older I get, the more I appreciate how rare that is. Real accountability has become almost a lost art. I know, I said. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't expect everything to go back to normal. Good, because it couldn't. Trust doesn't work that way. You shouldn't. She nodded. I know. And forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Another nod. I know that too. For the first time I believed she truly understood. Not because she was crying, because she wasn't asking for anything. No immediate forgiveness. No instant reset. No reward. Just honesty. We talked for another hour. About family. About mistakes. About expectations. About boundaries. For perhaps the first time in our entire relationship we spoke as 2 adults rather than 2 people trapped in old roles. Toward the end of the conversation, Emily asked, "Do you think we'll ever be okay?" The question deserved careful consideration. I wasn't interested in false promises, finally I answered. Eventually, she smiled through tears. Eventually, a small laugh escaped her. Fair enough? Then I reached across the table and touched her hand. Not because everything was fixed, because healing has to start somewhere. A week later, something happened that meant more to me than the apology itself. Emily called. Not for childcare. Not for a favor. Not because she needed something. Just to check on me. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. We talked about gardening, weather, the grandchildren, ordinary things. And somehow those ordinary things felt extraordinary. Because for the first time the relationship felt balanced, human, mutual. As spring turned toward summer, the family slowly began finding a new rhythm. Not the old rhythm, a healthier one. I spent time with the grandchildren because I wanted to, not because I was expected to. Michael became more involved at home. Emily became more appreciative. Boundaries remained in place. Respect began returning. And perhaps most importantly, nobody was pretending anymore. The birthday cake still existed in memory, but it no longer controlled the story. Because the story had become something larger. Growth, responsibility, change. The things that happen when people finally decide to face themselves honestly. And soon, one final family gathering would reveal just how much had changed. Summer arrived with the kind of warmth that makes children stay outside until the streetlights come on. The grandchildren spent their days riding bicycles, chasing fireflies, and turning every backyard into an adventure. Life felt lighter. Not perfect, but lighter. And after everything that had happened, that was enough. One Saturday morning, Sophie called. "Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart. Don't make plans for next weekend." I laughed. "That sounds serious." "It is." "Why?" "Because it's a surprise." I smiled. A surprise from a 10-year-old usually isn't much of a surprise. But I played along. "Okay, no plans." "Promise." "I promise." She hung up before I could ask another question. Children love mystery when they're the ones creating it. The following Saturday, Michael arrived at my house around noon. The entire family was in the car. Emily, Sophie, Tyler, little Emma, everyone. "Ready?" Michael asked. "For what?" "You'll see." I laughed. "You people are enjoying this far too much." Emily smiled. "You have no idea." That was the first clue. Months earlier, hearing those words from her would have made me suspicious. Now they simply made me curious. Growth works both ways. Trust doesn't return all at once. But eventually you stop waiting for the next disappointment. They drove me to a local community center. As soon as I walked inside, I stopped. The room was decorated with balloons, streamers, photographs. Family pictures covered several display boards along the walls. There were pictures of Frank, pictures of the grandchildren, pictures from holidays, birthdays, school events, vacations, and ordinary afternoons. My hand immediately flew to my mouth. Oh my goodness. Then I heard familiar voices. Family members emerged from every corner of the room. Janet, Ruth, neighbors, friends, even people I hadn't seen in years. Everyone shouted. Surprise. For a moment I couldn't speak. At 68 years old, there aren't many surprises left. Yet somehow they had managed it. I turned toward Michael. "What is all this?" His smile widened. "It's an appreciation party." I blinked. "An appreciation party." Emily stepped forward. "Yes." The room became quiet. Not awkward. Expectant. She held something behind her back. Then she revealed it. A birthday cake. A beautiful birthday cake. Vanilla. Pink flowers around the edges, almost identical to the one that had ended up on the patio months earlier. For a second, emotion hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. Emily walked slowly toward me. Everyone watched. She placed the cake on the table, then looked directly into my eyes. Not nervously, not defensively. Honestly, I thought this one deserved a better ending. Silence filled the room. The good kind. The kind that happens when people understand the importance of a moment. My eyes immediately filled with tears. Not because of the cake. Because of what it represented. Effort. Growth. Humility. All the things that had been missing before. Later that afternoon, after lunch was served and conversations filled the room, Michael stood up holding a glass. "Oh no," I said. Everyone laughed. Public speeches have never been my favorite thing. Michael ignored me. "Mom?" The room became quiet again. He looked around at everyone, then back at me. "I spent a long time assuming certain things would always be there." His voice softened. "Your help." A pause. "Your patience." Another pause. Your love. The room remained silent, listening. I never stopped appreciating you. His eyes filled slightly. But I definitely stopped showing it. That honesty hit harder than any polished speech ever could. Because it was real. Michael wasn't trying to sound impressive. He was trying to tell the truth. And sometimes truth is enough. Then something unexpected happened. Emily stood up. Without notes. Without preparation. Without warning. The entire room turned toward her. For a moment she looked nervous. Then she smiled. Most of you already know I made a pretty big mistake. Laughter rippled through the room, including mine. She shook her head. No, really. Then her expression became serious. I spent years focusing on what Carol did for our family. She paused, then corrected herself. Actually, that's not true. Another pause. I spent years taking it for granted. Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to. Emily looked directly at me. You deserved better than that. Tears filled my eyes again. Not because she was apologizing publicly, because she understood. Finally. Completely. I can't undo the past. Her voice cracked slightly. But I can do better moving forward. The room stayed quiet for several seconds. Then someone started clapping. Soon everyone joined in. Not because Emily was perfect. Because growth deserves encouragement too. As the afternoon continued, children ran through the room. People laughed. Stories were shared. Photographs were taken. For the first time in a very long time, family felt peaceful. Not because nobody had made mistakes, because people had learned from them. That's a much stronger foundation. Near sunset, I stepped outside for a few minutes. The air was warm. The sky glowed orange and gold. A few moments later, Emily joined me. We stood quietly beside the building, watching the evening settle in. Finally, she smiled. You know, what? I'm glad you didn't yell at me that day. I laughed. So am I. Why didn't you? I thought about that, then answered honestly. Because yelling would have made me feel better for 5 minutes. She nodded. And boundaries changed everything. Emily looked toward the sunset, then smiled. I think you're right. For once, so did I. Looking back now, I don't think the story was ever about a birthday cake, or a careless comment, or even disrespect. It was about something much bigger. The danger of allowing good people to become invisible. The importance of gratitude, the necessity of boundaries, and the possibility of change. Because people can change, families can heal, relationships can recover, but only when someone is brave enough to stop pretending everything is fine. If this story reminded you of someone who has quietly supported your life for years, maybe today is a good day to call them. Maybe it's a good day to say thank you. And maybe it's a good day to remember that appreciation means little unless it's expressed. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it with someone who might need it and subscribe for more stories about family resilience, forgiveness, and second chances. Take care of the people who have always been there for you. Sometimes they won't ask for recognition, but they deserve it anyway.